My name is Matthew David Rennie, R-E-N-N-I-E. I was born on the 11th of June, 1933.
1933. So how old are you now?
I am 85. I will be 86 in June this year.
Where were you born?
In Sydney.
Sydney. And tell me about your family when you were growing up, your parents and your siblings.
I had two older brothers, one younger brother and one younger sister. I have four siblings. Two of them, the two older ones have died. We grew up in just outside of Sydney in a place called Canley Vale. We had a pretty carefree sort of an upbringing. We didn't have too much discipline.
Yeah.
I was not interested in schooling. So I sort of run away from home a couple of times and ended up working out western New South Wales. I worked on a dairy farm for a period. I worked on a sheep property for a couple of weeks. I worked in a shearing shed. I worked for a fencing contractor who I thought was going to kill me because he was a workaholic. He'd start work when the sun come up and finish work when it was too dark to see. And he worked with him for a week. I woke up at too hard. I worked at a rouseabout on a big sheep property in New South Wales, a place called Burramugga. There was a combination of two sheep properties, a son and a daughter from each one married, and they combined the 250,000 acres. It was a beautiful property. Worked there. Then I worked for a drover, and I worked with him for probably a bit over 12 months, 18 months. So did a couple of big drives. Then I got a little bit sick of the bush, and I went back to Sydney.
Yeah. But let me ask this question. So study was not your thing. So did you learn anything about Korea? Did you know anything about Korea?
Never heard of it. Never heard of it.
You didn't know my great country name?
No. I believe anyone says they did to tell them fib, because I'd never heard about it. I never heard about Korea till, I think it was the Battle of Kapyong was the first I read about it in the newspaper, a big splash about it. And I immediately went and enlisted in the army.
When was it?
End of April 1951.
You joined the army?
Yes.
Why?
Stupid.
I know. You joined for war?
No, I joined for there was an opportunity to go to Japan. That was it. It was the adventure.
Even not Korea? You wanted to go to Japan?
I knew I'd end up in Korea, but it was just the excitement. It was something different.
So Korea was just
That was the second sort of choice, you know. So we got to Japan. I was only still 18 when I arrived in Japan. You're not supposed to be there till you're 19.
So hold on. After you joined the army, where did you get the basic military
I did
training?
my basic military training at Ingleburn.
Could you spell it?
Ingleburn. Ingleburn.
And what kind of military training was it?
Infantry training.
Infantry.
Yeah.
So basic.
Is there any other?
Yeah.
Yeah. I did infantry training there. I was in one battalion, and that was part of the 1st Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment. It was ready to go to Korea, but I was too young to go, so they moved me off, and I went to Puckapunyal.
What is that?
Another big training camp in Victoria. I went to Puckapunyal, I finished, and I got mixed up with K-Force. You've heard of K-Force?
Yeah.
Well, I was mixed up with them, and I was the only regular army one, and I was the youngest. They sort of looked after me, tucked me under their wing, and they protected me all the way along the line. I was then posted to three battalions, the Royal Australian Regiment, and I flew off out of Sydney in April 1952.
To Japan?
To Japan, yeah. Had to make Japan. So I got to Japan and we went straight into heavy training, nighttime training and everything else at a place called Haramura, which was the training, 1st Commonwealth Division Battle School. I did training up there and I had to wait till I'd turned 19 before they would send me to Korea. On the 4th of July I landed in Korea.
52.
52.
Where did you arrive?
Busan.
Busan.
Yeah.
And from Busan, where did you go?
We went up to Ujeongbu by train, which took all day. The slowest train ride I think I ever had.
That
really.
was the fastest one.
Yeah, it really was. We did rifle practice and all on the train, you know. So we got up to Ujeongbu, we went to B Echelon, which was our forming place, and from there we were allocated to companies. I went to 7th Platoon Charlie Company.
Charlie Company.
Yeah. 7th Platoon.
Uh-huh. And what was bigger unit? Royal Australian
Regiment.
Regiment.
3rd Battalion, that was the battalion that was in the Kapyong
3rd
battle.
Battalion, yes. Tell me about Korea you saw from Busan up to Uijeongbu. What did you, be honest, and this, hold on. The young children in Australia and all over the world, they don't have
no
a damn idea about how Korea looked in 1950.
You asked me the one thing that sticks in my mind that upsets me more than anything else is Busan. The refugee camp in Busan.
Busan.
Yeah, Busan, whatever you want to call it. It was a terrible time. There were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of refugees. They were living in boxes. They were living in makeshift hutches, whole families, all crowded. Hundreds of thousands there. The thing that really sticks in my mind was a little girl would be no more than 6 or 7 years of age. She had a little baby on her back.
7-year-old girl with the baby?
That was a 7-year-old girl with a baby on her back. And I guess she was minded for mum being the babysitter or whatever. And she was begging for food. Not for money, not for cigarettes, nothing, just food. And that's still, I've still got that. I can see, I close my eyes and I can still see that girl.
What were you thinking when you saw those?
I was very upset. I think everybody who's seen it was upset. You couldn't help but being upset. The poverty was, and the way of living and the desolation and that was absolutely horrendous. It really brings to force, I think, when you think of women and children first, when they always say if there's a disaster, look after the women and children. But in the Korean War, it was the women and the children that suffered terrible. That's terrible. How they survived winters, I have no idea. There must have been thousands died during the winter. They never had the clothing, they never had the heat, the nothing. I can remember, I didn't see it, but while we were there, the fire ripped through it, and I think it's recorded in Korea, but there was a fire went through and it killed an awful lot of people. And I also remember that a train carriage derailed up the top and it rolled back down through the camp and it killed a lot of people also because they're camped all over the railway lines, everywhere. Any spare patch of dirt is where they could put up something for shelter. And it was a horrendous, it was really one of the worst things you could ever wish to see. But that, to me, was brought to me what the Second World War refugee camps were like. It was, you know, I don't know whether they were the same, but the one in Busan that time was horrendous. It really was terrible. The countryside was worked over, there were bomb craters, shell holes, and there was not much happening within the country. From Ujeongbu to the front line, there was dirt roads, big signs up, don't speed, your dust will attract enemy artillery or mortar fire or all this sort of thing. And I arrived in 3 Battalion on the 7th of July 1952. And from then, every night we were either...
Hold on. Have you been back to Korea?
7 times.
7 times?
Yes.
My goodness. So,
I'd go back tomorrow if I could.
when was the first time that you went back?
1981.
And then, when was the latest?
And, 2010 for the celebration. 60th celebration.
Something wrong. How you can go back 7 times?
Oh, yeah, no trouble at all.
But tell me this.
Well, my son was up there for 10 days. He lives in Toowoomba. He worked for the Toowoomba City Council. He was on an exchange program with Paju City, and he was up there for 6 months. He rang me and said, for goodness sake, get an airline ticket and come up. Every morning when he goes to work, the governor was saying, when is your father coming? So I went up. They met me at the airport in Chong.
You paid for yourself?
Yeah, I paid my own airfare, but that's all.
So,
The governor of Paju hosted me for the 10 days I was up there.
that's a nice deal.
It was. It really was.
Tell me about the change you saw since 1970,
you can't.
1951.
It was a different world. It was a different country. It wasn't the same. The progress was incredible. All day to go from Pusan to Uijeongbu by train, all day. You can do it in 4 hours by bus, 4 or 5 hours in bus. Now you do it in 2 hours and 50 minutes by train or something. I forget now the time the bullet train take. But there were, when we first went up, when I left Korea, there was one bridge across the river, one.
Almost destroyed.
That's right. It was broken and that had been repaired to a certain degree. When I went back in 1990, there were 7 bridges over the river in the early 80s. When I went back in 2010, there's 27 bridges over the river. We've been talking about putting a fast train from Brisbane to Sydney for 50 odd years and we still haven't done it. You did it in less, you know.
So what do you think about this whole thing?
I think it's fantastic. I think it's incredible. And the reason why it happened was we were on a bus. The first time I went up there, we went from Pusan back to Seoul by bus, just for sightseeing. And I said to the guide we had, how come you built this road in just these, I forget now, I think it was 8 years it took to build the highway? And they used part of the highway as an airfield if anything happens. Some parts of it pretty wide. And he said, oh, well, we just got stuck into it. And I said, it would have taken 7 years in Australia arguing with the unions before we even started, you know. So that you don't have the union problem.
You arrived in July 4th, 52 in Busan. When did you leave Korea?
On the 4th of July, 1953.
Exactly same day?
Yep.
And when you left Korea in 1953, even a little before the armistice was signed, had you ever thought that Korea would become like this today?
No, no. You could count the amount of miles of bitumen road outside Seoul on one hand. There was no bitumen road. They were single tracks. Most of them, once you got a little way up from Seoul, you were virtually going around a paddy field. No, never envisaged it at all. Was blown away the first time I went back after.
So this is one of the most unprecedented phenomenon that have occurred in the 20th century history of human society.
Yeah.
That has a rapid economic development and very substantive democracy at the same time.
Yeah.
But why is it known as a forgotten war in the world? Why?
I think it was so close after the Second World War. Then it got tangled, it was sort of in between the Second World War and Vietnam, which was on everybody, and television was a big problem there because the Vietnam War was on everybody every night. It was on the news, it was flashes during the day and all that sort of thing. So Korea was just put aside. It just wasn't talked about. And when we came back, it happened to Kevin over here, when we came back, he wanted to join the RSL. Oh no, you can't join the RSL. Why not? It was a police action. You walked around with a truncheon. There you go. Madness.
What is RSL? Explain it. Return Service League.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
but
they didn't even see you
no,
as
they
a
didn't.
war veteran.
No, they did not recognise us as war veterans for quite some time.
That's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the old fellas, you see, after the First World War and they formed the RSL, they were the founders of the RSL. When the Second World War came, the young fellas coming back struck the same problem. The old fellas didn't want the new blokes in and all that type of thing. So it was, and then when Koreans come into it, it was just no. And a lot of people never knew. My very good friend who picked me up when I was wounded, he was away for 12 months. When he came home, somebody said to him, "Where you been?"
Yeah.
He said, "I've been to Korea." "Oh, where's that?" That's how much it was talked about. Nobody said, it didn't make a lot of publicity. Didn't sort of, people just didn't want to know about it because we were in an economic drive after the Second World War. There was plenty of work about. Nobody really wanted to know about it. That was all.
So you never thought that Korea would become like this today?
Yeah, I don't. Anyone that would have said, sitting in one of these interviews and said, "Oh, yeah, expected Korea to become a real powerhouse of the Far East," would be telling lies.
Yeah. You know what is the rank of Korean economy now?
Yeah, it's pretty high. I'm just not
It's
sure.
the 11th largest economy in the world.
And you've got no natural resources.
By 2030, we are expected to be number 7, ahead of France,
Really.
right behind England.
Yeah,
What do you think?
I think it's fantastic.
But Australian world history textbook doesn't cover much about the Korean War and its legacy. That's what we are trying to do. We want to change and the reality where that Korean War, known as Forgotten War, and doesn't talk about the legacy, came out of your service.
Yeah.
So we are making educational material based on this interview, and we're going to provide and train the teachers so that they can teach about the war you fought for. That's what we are doing.
Yeah. Some years ago, I gave a lecture to a lot of children that have been adopted into Australia, and there's a very strong Korean community in the Brisbane area of young that had adopted. And they used to have picnics and that sort of thing, and we used to go to the picnic and we would, I used to always get near somebody who was cooking up some Korean barbecue because it was better than what we had. But they asked me would I speak to the kids, because when they talked to them, they were bringing the kids up with their culture. They weren't trying to change who they were or what they were or anything like that. But none of them knew nothing about the Korean War. And I told them what I seen and what it was like. And they were astounded. They just couldn't grasp what went on in that country.
Do you have any history teacher or social studies teacher in your family?
No.
Let me know if you know of any history teacher, because we're working with the teachers, because that is the right way to keep your legacy.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, there will be no Korean War veterans.
That's right.
So we need...
He's one of the younger ones. Kevin over here is one of the youngest ones. And he's 83, I think. He's 83, 84. Yeah. And ugly one too, but anyhow. But
So let's talk about your military service. So in Uijeongbu, what did you do? And that was the front line, or where did you go?
it was further up.
Further up to where?
Yeah, on the other side of the Imjin River, on the northern side of the Imjin River. When they were on a feature, I think it was Yongdong Po, I think.
Yongdong Po was in Seoul area.
No, well, it was up something sounded like that. It was no, I can't remember.
Well, let's say the north of Imjin River.
Yeah, north of the Imjin River.
What was the base name? The Kansas line or something
No,
like
the
that?
Kansas line was the line we would fall back to if the Chinese put on a big push. It was about...
Any name, camp name, or?
No, not that I know of.
So tell me, what was your mission?
What we did, we patrolled the Samchon Valley.
Samichon Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We patrolled that valley. We dominated the valley because we did. The battalion commander said, if we control the valley, we will control our front line. And so we went out with fighting patrols and ambush. Half the battalion was on patrol every night, half of the battalion. The other half was standing to, manning pickets and all the rest of it.
3rd Battalion.
3rd Battalion of the Royal Australian
And Charlie Company.
Yes.
Tell me the detail. What was daily routine? When did you wake up? What did you eat? Where did you go?
Well, we slept, tried to sleep during the day. We had our make and mend. If we had a mortar attack during the night and any trenches were damaged to that, we had to repair the trenches and we would try to rest. Because as soon as dark come, you were out in the valley. You were setting up your ambush position, or you were going out on a fighting patrol. And everything happened to the night. Nothing happened during the day. It was the night time, went on very relentless. It just did not ease off. It was very relentless.
Yeah.
Fighting patrols were usually one officer, one NCO and 19 other ranks. Ambush patrol would be a senior NCO, a sergeant or maybe even a corporal, and 15, 17 other ranks. We would go out and set up. We used to have lay-ups where you'd go out early morning before daylight. You would find some place to lay up, camouflage, and you would observe what was happening on the Chinese side of the ridge. And you'd come back, and every hour you would have to report into battalion headquarters, situation normal, and that was the way it worked. And we did that continuously. If you were unlucky, you would run into a Chinese patrol.
Oh, run into Chinese patrol too?
Yeah, quite.
How close was it?
We were about 150 yards apart at that place. But
That's it?
Yeah. And
you were able to see?
Yeah, we could see their trenches, they could see our trenches. When you went out of the night, we ran into a patrol one night. It would have been November, early November. We ran into one of their patrols. We were going out early. We were going to set up an ambush patrol, but they were out early too. So we sort of clashed in the valley with a lot of fire and shouting and throwing of grenades and all that. And we withdrew to a prepared position where we would draw if anything happened like that.
At night?
At night, yeah.
It's so dreadful and
it was damn...
Because you cannot see those people.
No, it was frightening. It really was. 19 years of age, and coming from where I worked out in the western New South Wales and that sort of thing, it was frightening. We clashed with the Chinese. That's why I was carrying an Owen machine carbine, a small automatic weapon, 9mm. And I hit a Chinese, I know I hit him a few times with this, and he didn't stop. And that frightened me even more. And I ended up aiming higher and dropped him down. But when we pulled back to a position, we held that position for about an hour and a half, and the Chinese didn't follow us up. So we went back to where we'd clashed, and we found one Chinese who hadn't been picked up. And he had 7 bullets. But he had on a K-Pock Winter, 9mm wouldn't penetrate. It was like he was in a full armoured vest type thing, So that's when I decided I'd carry a rifle from then on, more hitting power.
Were any wounded?
I was wounded on the 24th of May.
May?
Yeah, 1953.
Where and how?
I was on 355, a massive, we used to call it Little Gibraltar.
Ah, Little
Gibraltar, yeah. You've heard of that with other interviews, yeah. Well, we were on the left-hand slope, as you were looking at, on the left-hand slope down there, and alongside us were the Turks. The Chinese put an attack in on the Turks because the Turks didn't give up any land. They held on. So the Chinese were probing the front line defences to see if they could find a weak spot. And that's when we got caught there. I said to this mate, Frank, I said, here comes a couple, and there was a lot of mortars and artillery and everything, a lot of noise and everything else. I fired at one, and the next minute I went down, I'd been hit. I had a helmet on, and the helmet had a neat little bullet hole. Well, we say it's a bullet hole.
Right.
But when I went into hospital, they said it was a piece of shrapnel. So whether it was a bullet or a piece of shrapnel, I'm not real sure. But according to my helmet, it would have been a bullet that just grazed the back of my head.
Whoa.
Yes, and I put me in hospital. I was in hospital for, I think about 10 days, something like that.
Where? In MASH unit? Or?
Yeah, Indian field MASH, the Indians.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was there.
And?
I went back to the front line again and continued patrolling till about a fortnight before I left, and I said, that's it, no more. I'm not going out anymore. I'm not giving them another chance. So so that was it. On the 4th of July, I was packed and ready to go very early morning. I was out.
You saw many soldiers dying?
Yeah.
In your side?
Yes.
What were you thinking at that frightening night battle and skirmish, and your friends are dying there?
I can tell you it was an awful feeling. It was an awful feeling. It was a feeling of helplessness, I think. You couldn't stop it. You didn't know how to get out of it.
There's no way to get
no way, no way to get out of it.
Unless you flee from it.
Yeah, and you couldn't do that. You just, maybe you wanted to, but your feet wouldn't take you away. You had to do what you had to do. You did what you were trained to do.
Does that affect you now?
Yes.
Nightmare or
nightmares, PTSD. I have
you have PTSD?
Yes, I have nightmares and I have panic attacks. I had one the other night. Had one on Sunday night.
Sunday night? Mm-hmm. What happened?
I had a dream. I had a lot of blood and guts. And
you still see those?
I say yes, and I woke myself up because I seemed to have cleared it all. We were winning, and then I seen some more coming, and I screamed out, "Oh bloody hell!" And I woke myself up. I don't know whether the neighbours might have heard me too. That was it. I have to feel that.
What was your rank at the time?
Private.
Private?
Yep.
So pretty low.
Yeah, can't go much lower.
How much were you paid?
About
27?
Yeah, about I'm trying to think. I should have bought my paybook. I think it was about £7-8 a week, something like that.
£7-8.
£7-8 a week. No, that wouldn't do it. That'd be £16 a foot. No, it was less than that.
No, not in the week.
Yeah, less than that.
Was it a month?
No, a week. Less than a week.
Okay.
Less than that. It would have been. I was only getting £13 a fortnight when I left the army in 1961.
So you didn't gamble?
No,
you didn't play poker?
No.
No.
No, drank too much.
Oh.
Beer was cheap.
Beer?
Yeah. It was cheap to drink Korean whiskey too. We went down to Little Gibraltar, Little Chicago, buy a bottle of Korean whiskey, and we found out it was brewed, aged, bottled, and sold the same day.
Same day.
Yeah.
Were there any Korean people working with you, or Korean
we had 2 Korean catcoms, and we had there were a battalion group who brought supplies up to the front line, ammunition, all that sort of thing. Yeah. The catcoms. We had one catcom killed in a mortar barrage. He was running from one pit to another, and he got killed. Yeah. But they were good. They were good professional soldiers.
According to the statistics, there are 399 Australian soldiers killed in action, more than 1,000 soldiers wounded and missing in action.
I did a bit of research, as Kevin.
I thought that study is not your thing.
Just, I did a thing on, just got to find it, on how many people were wounded and killed in the United Nations, and how many went into captivity, but how many came out. I read an awful lot of books. I've researched it for a long time.
There you go.
Mainly because when we go to an RSL meeting, they would talk about the First World War, the Second World War, Vietnam, and that, but not about Korea. So I used to have arguments and fights with them, and I'd say, well, you know, we lost so many. I say, you know, you hear different figures about the Americans. On the American memorial, Korean memorial, is 54,000 dead. That does not include 8,600 that were missing at the end of the Korean War. Exactly. That makes 62,000. And you only lost 58,000 in 11 years in Vietnam.
Yeah.
There was 1,172,000 wounded.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm teaching. You know, the Vietnam War spent for more than 10 years.
Yeah.
Korean War just 3 years.
3 years, 1 month and 2 days.
But if you look at the number of Medal of Honor awarded by the American government, it's just less than half of Vietnam.
Yeah.
And all in the textbook, all talking about Vietnam War, Vietnam War, Vietnam War. There's little part on the Korean War.
Yeah. I can some books that I've got on Korea. One is Frozen Chosen, about the American 1st Division. Another one is The Coldest Winter, which is that should be a must for every school kid to read it. We're not long finished reading it. And it tells why there's so many missing in action, because they were shot. They fell out of the march from Pusan perimeter to the Yalu, right through the winter, one of the worst winters in living memory in Korea, and they fell by the wayside. They were shot.
That's why we are doing this. I was angry that Korea has been ignored for a long time.
It has been
ignored. It's time to change it.
Yeah.
So, Matthew, what was the most difficult thing, if I ask you to pinpoint one thing out of your whole service in Korea? What did bother you most?
The cold. The cold.
Where did you
cannot describe the cold. You know, I've had people say, but I work in a cold room. I said, what's the temperature? Oh, it's about 5 degrees below freezing. I said, and you come out into warm air. Yeah. In Korea, you couldn't do that. You slept in 2 sleeping bags. I tell people what we had to wear to try and keep warm, and they say, well, how'd you move around? I tell them with great difficulty. There is a story about a female journalist interviewing an American Marine in the field MASH, and said to him, what's the most difficult thing you've had to do here? And he'd been wounded. And he said, getting my dick out, 2 inches of dick through 4 inches of clothing to have a pee. And it's true. It's true. That's how it was. You wore so much clothing. And if you took your clothing off, you froze. You just freeze. I'll tell you a funny incident. We had a chap, Macduff. He drank a fair bit and he liked that Korean scotch, so he got drunk on it. And we had Christmas in the front line, so they pulled us out for New Year. We had New Year in reserve. So we went down to Little Chicago, we bought all the grog to celebrate the New Year with, and we were in the Gloucester Valley area for rest. And we were 8 feet underground, we had a potbelly stove, 44-gallon drum of diesel up top, and by the halfway through the night, the pot-bellied stove was glowing red. It was that hot, you know. So off come the parka, off come the jacket, off come the pullover. So you're sitting there virtually and just with all the along their legs in a string singlet. Macduff wanted to go to the thunderbox. the call of nature. So he put a parka on, and away he went. We didn't realise he'd gone, and we didn't know how long he'd been gone. Mm-hmm. So when we went looking for him, we found him sitting on the thunderbox. He pulled down 3 pairs of long johns that we used to wear.
Yeah.
He pulled them down and was sitting there. When we went to lift him up, we couldn't. He was frozen.
Stick to it.
So we thought, how do we get him up? Cigarette lighter.
Oh.
Little bit by little bit by little bit, and we got him up. Put him in hospital, 3rd degree burn to the bum. And we went to his grave with a big horseshoe on it. But it was good thinking, yes, sir.
Where did you sleep? Were you in the bunker? Or?
In a bunker.
Okay.
We slept in a bunker.
With a lot of rats?
With a lot, yeah. They're big as house cats, they were. We had some funny incidents about those. Bloke trying to shoot him and all this sort of thing. One bloke shot his toe off, and all sorts of funny things happened to the rats. They were monsters. There was plenty of them to eat, and but the rats, I think, the pigs were terrible. So I didn't.
Wild pig?
Yeah, I didn't eat pork for years and years and years after I came back. We had this sound on the wire early morning and fog, and you know, well, I don't have to tell you what the fog was like, but the fog was so thick, and we could hear this rattling of the wires. It went on for a while, and everybody stand to, and everybody's really on edge. And in the end, the platoon commander said, "Open fire, fire!" You know, they blazed away for a couple of minutes. Stop, no sound. So when the fog lifted, here's this big pig. So we took him down to the cookhouse.
Oh,
the cookhouse, boiled some water and stripped him down and cooked him, and we had a feed of pork. When the thaw came, we were crossing the Imjin River across the Teal Bridge, and the thaw had come, and the river was flowing, and here was the different bodies had washed up from the thaw. And here was a pig with his head buried in a body. And I never ate pork for years after. I wouldn't touch it.
Matthew,
Yes.
the Korean War that you fought for never been replaced with the peace treaty at all. It's going to be 70th year next year. Have you seen any war lasted that long?
No.
What do you think we have to do about that?
It's a political thing now. I don't know what you do about it, really. I wouldn't trust the North anything with anything. I don't know what you do with it, really. I'm always amazed, and anyone who's been up there, any of the other veterans that have been up there, that the South Korean people have lived with the threat of war hanging over their head for 60-odd years. But they get on with life, and they still do the same thing. Tomorrow it could all be obliterated, but they still get on doing what they got to do. You know, I don't know how you're ever going to stop it, or how you're ever going to change it. They're despot rulers.
You told me you never knew anything about Korea before you went to fight. Now you've been there 7 times.
Yes.
So what is Korea to you personally now? What is Korea to you?
Korea to me, it has a piece of me there. I spilled blood on the ground, so I belong to it there. I have a feeling about the place. The people are just fantastic. They are over-generous. They treat you like you're an exalted person. I can always remember when I was staying with my son, and I got on the train, we're going into Seoul, and he said, we'll ride the trains rather than go on the little bus that the council provided. And so we got on the train, and a little old lady got up because I got grey hair. She thought I was an old man. You know. But I love the place. I really do. The food. We went to lunch, or we went for morning tea with the governor of Paiju. And morning tea extended to lunch, and lunch extended to afternoon tea. So we were there all that time. And it was really one of the best social lunches I've ever been to. It was fantastic. It was really great. It was just sociable. People were lovely.
What would you say to the world about the war that you fought for? in the context of 70th anniversary?
It was a terrible war. It was horrendous. Not so much for the soldiers, they knew what they were doing, but it was the people. The people. My research showed me that there were 50,000 villages destroyed in the whole of the Korean Peninsula. You can't imagine that. You can't, it's just a figure. 2.5 million civilians died. That's the population of some of the towns in Queensland. It's just horrendous. The casualty figures overall, everything that happened, the civilians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the South Koreans, everything, the figures were horrendous. And it wasn't something that just started today and finished tomorrow and we'll all go home and have a good time. It took years and years and years to recover from it. And I think anyone who goes back now, to go back to Korea, is astounded. And my mate over there, Kevin, he went back only 2 years ago and he hasn't got over it yet.
Matthew, I think I can go on and on with some drinks together. Yeah. But it's great interview. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your feelings and your experience about it. And I want to make sure that we're going to use this for the education for the future generation.
I once wrote a story for my kids about my life, my first 60 years that I could remember. And that covers everything, even some of my photos of when I enlisted, my service records, and photos of when I was in Korea, how cold it was, the clothing we wore, the whole lot.
Great. Thank you, man. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
It's a great honor to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your fight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.